water and the bottle of heroin, right? So none of the rats drank themselves to death, not one. None of them used compulsively. None of them felt obligated to keep going to the heroin, right? None of them. So then the result of that was that community and not being isolated and feeling alone helps, right? These rats weren't even using the heroin. Whereas this isolated and alone rat used it to its demise. Okay, I love that story. And when you hear this guy talk about it, it's fantastic. So this is why substance abuse in children is a symptom. This is why substance abuse is a symptom for everybody, right? Our approach to substance abuse and drug addiction is to criminalize them, right? It's about shame. It's cutting them off from society, right? And shaming them. And then there isn't really a whole lot of hope when they are out, because now they have this record and this shame, and integrating back in society is much more difficult. So how do you avoid dealing with that, right? You use again. This is why the success rate for drug addiction is so low, right? This is why I don't do drug addiction. I would have never become a chemical dependency counselor. I would not, because the reward isn't that high, right? There's a lot that happens. There's a lot of loss. There's a lot of rehab. There's a lot of reusing again. There's a lot of that. And I don't have the stamina for that. I work with kids because it's fast. Like, I get good response in a short period of time. Kids are quick and easy, right? So I get more from that. So the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. I was seeing a family. We lived in Kansas City, and I worked in an outpatient clinic there. And I was seeing this little girl. She was the oldest of 5 kids. And her mom would bring her, and her mom just had a hard life. At one point, her mom was prostituting herself for survival, and she'd been arrested a couple of times, and she'd done all kinds of stuff, right? Currently, she was working full-time waiting tables. She's working full-time. Now she's got 5 kids, right? Her oldest is having a hard time. Her little ones are having a hard time too. Things are still pretty chaotic. But she told me at one point that she smokes marijuana every night. And I looked at her. Now, she told me that her diagnosis was bipolar disorder, right? There are meds for that. There's mood stabilizers and stuff for that. But the way the system is set up, she didn't have access to meds, right? She didn't have the insurance that she needed. The insurance wasn't covering it. Getting herself to the appointment to do that was a problem, because she's working as much as she can just to make ends meet with 5 kids, right? When she told me that she was smoking every day, I looked at her and I said, don't stop. You need to keep doing that. Because I knew that this was the only thing that was keeping her together, right? She needed this. She was self-medicating with marijuana. And I told her, I said, if you ask anybody, I'm gonna tell you I didn't say it, but you need to keep doing it. Because I knew that these kids were gonna be safer if she was smoking, right? So I actually would not consider her a drug addict. I don't. I told her to smoke every day. And if she needed to do more than that, I would have encouraged that too, because she was barely keeping it together. Her moods were all over the place. And the way the system is set up is not helping her in any way. So some people, and on a piece of paper, she might be considered a drug addict. I disagree with that. Now, I also probably would disagree with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder means that you have episodes of significant depression, and you have episodes of being manic or being really hyper and intense and unable to focus. And sometimes bipolars are awake for days, right? And then they crash, and they crash into significant depression. So there are meds that help with that help stabilize the mood, so they're not like roller coasters all the time. But without access to that, this was a solution that we needed to use. And I don't know which came first, if it was the bipolar or her own issues in her life, in her childhood. Once you take away those early traumas, she might not actually be bipolar, right? Once you take away the reason that she keeps avoiding her life with drugs and alcohol and being manic and being depressed, once you take away the trigger, she might not look like bipolar anymore, like she's bipolar anymore. Okay. All right, so I look back at Love and Logic. Love and Logic is a parenting website that I think is fantastic. I did most of my learning about parenting stuff. I started doing parenting stuff with kids before I had kids. So I needed to find a resource, and I found Love and Logic, thankfully, and it's fantastic, right? So you can just go in Love and Logic. So Love and Logic has these 4 tips for you. The first tip is teach your children that poor choices lead to unpleasant consequences. We have talked about that before, right? Give your kids choices for everything so that they can see how the decisions that they make affect them. And then hold them accountable to the poor decisions that they make, right? And if we start this little, they can see how their role is in their happiness or in their unhappiness, right? And you are the one that has to hold them accountable for it all, because then they translate as they get older. So it says, when children know that poor decisions lead to unhappiness, they tend to be a lot more careful about the choices that they make. So this means we're not rescuing them from their bad decisions, right? Love and Logic parents allow their children to make plenty of choices and plenty of mistakes when the consequences of these mistakes are not serious or life-threatening. So the goal is to do it when they're little and all throughout their life before they get into adolescence, when it becomes the most dangerous because of drugs and alcohol and cars and driving and sex and all that stuff, right? So if we do it then they can see how they are then responsible for themselves. The wisdom children gain from being held accountable for these smaller mistakes makes them less likely to make bigger ones when peers turn up the heat. All right? Your kids are going to be offered drugs. They just will. And they're going to be offered from their friends. They will be offered drugs from their friends. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually they're going to be offered drugs from their friends, right? So how do you respond to that? Like, help them have a solution and a way to respond to it. I knew in high school, that I was not going to try drugs because somehow I got a message. Now, I do believe that there was some divine intervention, and me owning this as a true belief in my head. I knew that if I liked it, I would have to prostitute myself to get it. We had no money. There was no resource for me to go get the money. I did not have access to cash, right? I worked 2 jobs all through high school. So I had my money, but I was blowing my money and stuff too. I mean, I was having to buy things for me, like my own stuff, right? And I knew that would be what I had to do. I would have to start prostituting. And this was early in high school, that I knew in my head that was going to be my path if I liked it. So I never did. Now, I was also a little peeved because no one offered me any in high school. I'm like, what is the problem? I got a great comeback. I had my line all worked up, and why isn't anybody offering? So some of my other friends said that they'd be offered stuff, and I'm all put out going, well, why didn't anybody ask me? They don't think I'm going to need it. I don't even get to say my line. I don't get to say how I'm not going to use that. I don't get to tell them that I'm not going to prostitute. I don't get to say anything. But I knew that, and maybe that's what happened, is that I gave that off already. I gave off to other people that this was not my path. And not because I walked around talking about, the war on drugs and just say no. I wasn't in the picket line. I didn't do any of that stuff. But there must have been something that I was giving off energetically that no one actually ever approached me with it. The first time that I was approached with it was friends, right? I was with a friend that I knew from high school. We were in college, and we went... I don't know why she always dated these boys that were selling drugs or using drugs. I don't know, because she was so smart and so pretty. We were going out, and we ended up, she said, let me stop at his house for something. So we go to his house, and there's just a Coke party happening, right? And it's real typical. I'm like, I thought this was just in a movie. But, you know, we're walking in, and there's like the cocaine on the table and the mirror, and the dollar bills rolled up and the whole bit. And everyone was fine. They were kind of nice, and it was like dark and stuff. And they're like, hey, do you want some? And I was like, no. And we just hung out for a little bit, and I guess she did whatever she needed to do. And then we just left. And it wasn't an issue. And it wasn't something, now did I run home and tell my mom about it? No, right? But I also didn't do anything either. I didn't feel threatened, but I left. I didn't stay all night, and I wasn't talked into anything, right? And they didn't care about me anyway, they were busy. So I was able to just go. But they will happen into situations where they have to make a decision. So help them understand that and potentially how to respond. This tip from Love and Logic, I think, is the hardest for me, just so you know before I say it. So avoid power struggles over friendship choices. That is hard. And I honestly have to do a lot of self-talk the whole time I'm talking to myself about it. Don't do that, Kary. Don't tell him he cannot go with this child that you think is using. Don't do it. So I have heard this early on. Even when my kids were younger, I had heard this. So I knew the response was something along the lines of, doesn't sound like he makes good choices. How lucky he is to have you as a friend, because you get to help him make better choices. I hope he sees how great you are. So, Love and Logic says, don't fall into the trap of fighting a losing battle over who will choose their child's friends. Parent-child clashes over this issue actually drive kids away from their parents and the family they need so badly. Many American teens hit the streets each year because of the resentment these fights create. Love and Logic parents say, we will love you regardless of who you choose to be your friend. Right? A lot of times they can be the positive influence, and just because they're around it doesn't mean they have to use it. And if you have a good relationship with your child, you've already talked about ways that they can manage that situation and how potentially they could be helpful and what could be potentially happening